Well, good afternoon. This is the Public Circle Live. This is episode 10. Unbelievably, we've been successful in completing 10 episodes. Actually, we haven't completed the 10th episode of the Public Circle Live. This is April the 20th today, and you may look around and see that I'm shooting from a different location. I'm in Vancouver today. And more on why I am in Vancouver in a few minutes, because look, weeks ago we talked about in question period we talked about the potential of setting up a wild salmon secretariat. Well, we've explored that a little bit further today, where we invited a wide variety of stakeholders on salmon, on wild salmon, to a boardroom in Vancouver, and we heard what their ideas were. The Public Circle Live is our weekly Facebook live show, and thank you very much for joining us. The Public Circle is the public outreach of our constituency office, and it hosts things like our community dialogues, and upcoming in June, we're going to be hosting a series of town hall meetings right across the province. It's April the 20th. This is the 10th episode of the Public Circle, and today I am going to go in depth, a little bit deeper into the conversation that we had today. As you can see, I'm flying solo today. I have no guests. So if you have a question, today would be a good day to ask a question. A lot has been going on in BC politics. I'm not going to pretend like there hasn't been a whole pile of other issues other than the wild salmon piece that I and my colleagues in the legislature have been working on and been supported by a great deal of staff. We were seeking, as I said today, feedback on our wild salmon secretariat. I do encourage you to engage this video. I encourage you to leave comments below. Ask me a question if you have any questions about the week that was in BC politics. Again, a lot going on. If you want to ask some questions about the work that we're doing on the Wild Salmon Secretariat, that'd be fantastic as well. We do want to fix the situation and the relationship with our coast. We also want to fix the relationship with natural resources, not only in our province, but right across our country. A little bit more on that. Hello, Kathy Weisner. Good to see you. So, hit the like button. I see a few have already been doing it. Hit the love button, the little heart button, the love button. The heart button if you like what's going on here. Hit the wow button if you can't believe it. Also, this is BC politics, so you may actually have to use that frustration button, that angry button, and that sad button. I won't take it personally. If you want to get a hold of our constituency office, and I apologize for the light. It seems like this big bulb forehead of mine will get really bright or really light. It's the light in the hotel room here. If you want to get a hold of our office, adam.olsen.mla@ledge.bc.ca if you want to send us an email. If you want to give us a call, you can get a hold of Ryan or Aldous or myself at 250-6 or Laura, 250-655-5600. You can check out my website. I put all the work of the video work that we do up at www.adamolsen.ca. So go and check out all the work that we did this past week in the legislature. Okay, so really quickly, well, maybe not really quickly. It was a long day today, and we had 12 different groups who have all been working on for a long time. And I want to say that since I got elected in the legislature, I brought my love and my passion for the Saanich North, as it's known in the Sanchothan language. It's right here on my wedding ring, the wild salmon. And as many of you know, I've been asking questions in question period. I've been asking the various ministries and the ministers about who it is that runs and manages wild fish, who has our wild fish policy at the center of their work. And as we learned, and in a letter that we received back, there are 6 ministries that all have wild salmon as a priority for their ministry. And basically what we've been finding is that the NDP government inherited an operation that didn't really have wild salmon at the top of their priority. In fact, going back to 2003, at the time of the last government transition from the NDP to the Liberals, then Agriculture Minister was pretty clear. John Van Dongen was pretty clear. This is not a wild salmon, wild fisheries, isn't a priority for the BC Liberal government. And they certainly acted like that over the past decade and a half, no question about it. Their priority was on fish farms. And as we get to a decision that the current government needs to make about whether or not we're going to allow those fish farms to reattach or to attach, to continue to operate, is going to have to be driven by a policy of this government. The former government was pretty clear. They had free enterprise. They were up for big multinational corporations. They were going to support those, and they did. And they set that as their policy agenda, and they followed through with it right through until they were no longer government just almost 1 year ago. What we need is the new government, the new BC NDP government, to assert themselves in the same kind of way as the BC Liberals did, to state what the goal is, and then to develop a plan and to follow through with it. And clearly, British Columbians strongly support a wild salmon economy, support for wild salmon. Very, very strong support for wild salmon in our province. And what we've been doing today in Vancouver with 12 or 13 organizations in salmon conservation, commercial salmon fishing, sports salmon fishing, First Nations, habitat restoration. We had the full gambit of organizations, all of the interests. And it's a very emotional subject, and in the past, organizations have been at odds with one another. They've been splitting fish, basically. Sharing a diminishing wild salmon fish stock has created struggles and animosity and frustration amongst the groups. And I want to be able to say that the conversation that we had today was unbelievable. I think that one of the things that I started with early on in the conversation was that I don't come from a conservation perspective. I don't come from a preservation perspective, or from a First Nations perspective, or from a commercial fishery, or from a sport fishing perspective. I come from this perspective of the salmon. Without salmon, there is none of those industries. And we learned very quickly that those industries are very profitable for British Columbia, much more profitable than the open net fish farms. And just this week, we saw 2 new campaigns, a startup against the continuation of open net fish farms on our coast, with the June 20th deadline coming. Earlier this week, I let you know I signed a declaration at safesalmon.ca. I signed that declaration, and just today I learned that there's another group. That's right, you can go check it out. It's not going to be good because it's backwards. Check out #WildFirst. Wild First, you can go to wildfirst.ca. Another wild salmon advocacy group, organization has started. The pressure is really starting to build on this provincial government. It's time for British Columbians who overwhelmingly support wild fish to let government know that they are not in support of us continuing the farmed salmon, the farm salmon. I'm just reading a quote. Thank you, Jan, for your comment, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I'd just like to say, very, very strong support for a wild salmon fishery in this province, and for us to take action on it. So one of the things that we found was that there is an intense amount of fragmentation within our government. Whenever we went to work to ask questions of government about salmon policy, they'd say, "Oh, that's another ministry. You got to go talk to a different ministry." This was very, very frustrating, of course, and not very productive. And so one of the things that we suggested was this Wild Salmon Secretariat, and saying, hey, look, we need to organize government. If we are ever going to make any headway with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which clearly British Columbia needs to assert itself and assert its interests with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, the federal department that's been managing salmon. It's responsible for salmon for decades, managing it, as someone said today, managing it to zero, which is clearly the case. Then we are going to need to organize ourselves. We're going to need to make sure that the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources and Rural Development, the Ministry of Transportation and Highways, the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, all of these Ministry of Environment and Climate Strategy, all of these ministries have decision-making about fish, but none of it is at the center of their decision-making. Fish are all on the outside, and we need to consolidate that voice. We need to consolidate that within a single organization within government. Now, there are a number of different ways that could be organized, and I think that we were exploring that, and we were asking the questions. So Jan just asked, she's lost the sound. Has anybody else lost the sound? I just want to make sure that people can still hear this. And I did get your question, Jan. We'll get to questions in just a minute. Anybody else hear me? Everybody else hear me? Hit the like button if you can. Anyway, I'll just keep going as if they can. So we asked the question of the organizations. We asked the organizations how it is that government agency should be organized. And we got a ton of feedback. And my colleague Claire, as well as and my colleagues Claire and Evan and Alex, all got a bunch of information, a bunch of feedback about what the values are of those organizations and how it should be organized. And we're going to be producing a report. And finally, one of the things producing a report to give to government. In fact, the government had one of their advocates in the room. So we are working very closely with government on this, and it was really good to see the support from the current government on this issue. So we're going to be doing a report to government about what we heard from these organizations. But more than that, there's a couple of things. One, we heard from the organizations in the room that they don't come together like this and have these kind of conversations. And to me, that's shocking and it's inappropriate. We need to be calling together organizations and having these conversations in a safe place with fish at the center, with the conflict being diminished because we all agree that good salmon policy is critical, and good salmon policy is good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's good for society. Good salmon policy is good triple bottom line policy. The second thing that I want to say is that we are going to continue. The groups clearly wanted a voice, someone to continue speaking for salmon, and I promised them, and I promise you, and I will continue to do it. I am going to continue to talk about wild salmon policy in the legislature. I am going to continue to vociferously advocate for wild salmon policy. I'm going to continue to stand for wild salmon policy because, as was pointed out, my grandfathers, my great-grandfathers, as we say in Senchothan, myself, Wayne, were salmon fishermen. My dad was a salmon fisherman. I grew up fishing salmon. And my children have not fished nearly to the amount that I have. In fact, they don't fish salmon. And there's a great deal amount of sadness. And this is a huge part of who we are as British Columbians. And we cannot afford this to be lost in our province. It is too important to who we are as a people. It's too important to our culture. So and as I said to the groups that were with us today, I will continue to stand up for wild salmon in the legislature. I'll continue to stand up for wild salmon outside the legislature. And I call on all the organizations, let's work together. Let's work together in a way for the fish, with the fish at the center. Let's set aside all of our other differences and let's work for those fish. So, there were a couple of questions, and I know they've now gone by, and I don't have anybody here alongside me that is helping me and able to track those. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to find this online here. Perhaps I can. There I am. Here are some questions. Okay. Jerry Sam, I believe, Jerry Sam, you got a link to the... Yes, there it is. Hello from Salt Spring to Kathy Weiser. Hello, good to see you again this week. Joe asked a question. What are we going to do to promote transit and electric buses in BC? Clearly, we need to move to electrification. There's no question about it. And so the BC Transit needs to be provided the support from government to get to investing in electric buses. I believe that there was one purchased for the Lower Mainland here. We need to start to move very quickly and aggressively to rapid, mass transit. Investing in transportation is good for our environment, good for the economy, good for moving people. And I can tell you, as I've started to commute to the legislature every day, I can tell you the traffic in Victoria is an increasing problem. The traffic in the Lower Mainland is increasingly a problem. And so investments in transit, the government made that commitment and will continue. We will continue to be pushing on the government to make those commitments that they made in the election campaign a reality in the budget. Not only this budget, but the next budget. So, right, another question. Someone was asking about Kinder Morgan. And I'll be happy to address Kinder Morgan. And for the most part, Kinder Morgan and the work that I've been doing on salmon are very much connected. As many of you know, I was an intervener in the National Energy Board hearing for the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. And I was accepted as being directly affected because I'm an Indigenous person from the Saanich people. I'm a Sartlip person, a member, born and raised in Brentwood Bay. I was an intervener in that because I was very concerned with the shipping, the shipping of diluted bitumen through our territory, through the Southern Gulf Islands. I'm now an MLA that represents those very same Southern Gulf Islands. The issue that is being raised, and I respect the point that was made, was that a majority of people in a recent poll support the Kinder Morgan pipeline, and that's fine. I think that if you take a look, and that's what the headlines read, and that's what that was the most widely reported piece in the news. But there was also a whole pile of other questions. I encourage you to go take a look at them. People are concerned with our coast. People are concerned about climate change. People are concerned about salmon. People are concerned about how diluted bitumen responds when it gets into the ocean environment. And the work that the British Columbia government is doing right now is asking the question, what authority does the provincial government have in regulating its environment? And this past week we saw a court case around beer, around the ability to move beer from one, and it's not a trivial thing. The Supreme Court of Canada said that there is the provincial governments do have authority, and they do have authority when it comes to the environment. Now, the provincial government is going to be asking this question of the courts, which is the place where we need to be sorting these things out, and having these questions answered. So the reality is that the federal government's own studies, have called into question whether or not we can clean up a spill, whether or not we even know what happens to diluted bitumen if it is spilled. And as the representative of Saanich North and the Islands, I'm not going to stand by when this project has been approved in the way that it was approved, through the process that I was a part of, and that I can bear witness to the fact that it was not a good process, that the process did not get it was not the science, so-called science, was not tested. There was no oral cross-examination. There was these circular questions and answers that were provided in writing. No one ever tested the evidence that I put on the table. No one ever tested the evidence that Trans Mountain put on the table, and no one ever tested the evidence of other experts. That's not a good process. And so when our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, stands up and says, we base this on evidence and we base this on science, let my silence speak to what I feel about that. I just simply don't agree. And I don't, it's just, I think it's just wrong-headed to be putting that out there, that it was based on science, because the process that I was a part was not scientific, and the evidence that was put on the table was not tested. And so he can claim that all he wants, but it's just simply not the case. And so when it comes to the poll about Kinder Morgan and about whether or not a majority of British Columbians support the Kinder Morgan pipeline, I think a majority of British Columbians, and I believe that Aldous put on another link for you to check out some other information about that poll. I think that it's really important to recognize that we have a duty as elected representatives to stand up for British Columbia, to stand up for our coast, and to be able to ask important questions about products that are being shipped and moved into our province that then have the potential of significantly damaging our economy, significantly damaging those same fish that I spent the majority of this video talking about. And that's exactly the work that we're doing. And as the representative of Saanich North and the Islands, as a member of the Saanich people and the Sartlet people, I have to say that I'm going to be standing strong on this, that we do our due diligence and that we do our work, because I do not believe that the federal government did theirs. So we are now at 22 minutes. It's now time for me to sign off this week. I thank you all very much for joining us. Please do hit that like button a few more times. Show this Facebook Live, the Public Circle Live, a little bit of love. We do this every week. I'm a little bit disjointed this week, I have to admit, because it's been a while since I've flown solo on this show. Normally I've got someone to have a conversation with, so it's felt a little bit disjointed, but I appreciate all the love and likes and everything being bestowed upon this show. Do tune in next week, where we'll have the 11th episode of the Public Circle Live. I can't believe that we're already there. If you'd like to get a hold of us in our office, you can get a hold of us at adam.olsen.mla@ledge.bc.ca. Someone will probably drop that in the comments for me, please. If you want to give our office a call, you can give us a call at 250-655-5600. Someone will probably drop that into the comments section below. I do see that there's some other questions that are coming in. I'm in Vancouver for the night tonight, so I will probably have some time a little bit later on to drop some answers into there. Also, thank you, Laura. Check out my salmon story. There's a link there for you to check it out. Also, share with us your salmon story. Again, don't forget to visit safesalmon.ca and what was it? It was wildfirst.ca. Maybe you can see the links in the description of this video below. Thank you very much for joining us this week. I am going to sign off now. And good to see you, Dee Dee. Good to see you, Laura. Good to see you, Kathy. Good to see all of you who joined me this week. I will be back in my office next week for episode number 11. So until then, as always, Hayequa.